Morning, everyone. I have been struggling with my own technology this morning. I apologize for being late in getting started. And let me see if I can get the chat up so that I can see what you're saying to me. Um, I do apologize for this late start. I usually send out a notice the night before, but I didn't do it yesterday, and it's my fault, and I apologize for that. And so I will begin here momentarily. Okay, so today we're going to be reading the second sermon to the dead. And the interesting topic here is we want to know about God. Where is God? Is God dead? And so, all of us, good morning, Art. Thank you for being patient. I'm sorry it took me so long to get online. I literally managed to erase my own coordinates for the session. And so it took me a while to get it to be able to send it. And that was the reason for my lateness. It's all my fault. I screwed up somehow. I don't know how. But anyway, we are on page 515 of the Red Book by C.G. Jung, the Reader's Edition. And so we last week started a series of sermons that Philemon is giving to the dead in Jung's imagination. And okay, and so today we're going to read the second sermon to the dead and talk about it. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. You're not late. Um, so, all right, so we are on page 515, and I just want to read a footnote here. For Nietzsche's discussion of the death of God, see The Gay Science, 1882, paragraph 108 and 125. And thus spake Zarathustra, section 4, retired from service. For Jung's discussion of this, see Psychology and Religion, 1938, collected works 11, paragraph 142 and following. Jung commented, when Nietzsche said God is dead, he expressed a truth which is valid for the greatest part of Europe. To Nietzsche's statement, Jung noted, however, it would be more correct to say he has discarded our image, and where will we find him again? Hello, Amela. He goes on to discuss the motif of death. Excuse me, I'm having allergy problems today on top of everything else. He goes on to discuss the motif of death and the disappearance of God in connection with Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. Okay, so I will begin now at the bottom, the last full paragraph, numbered 7, at the bottom of page 515. That night, Philemon stood beside me, and the dead drew near and lined the walls and cried out, we want to know about God. Where is God? Is God dead? But Philemon rose and said, and this is the second sermon. And this is the second sermon to the dead. Quote, God is not dead. God is alive as ever God is, creation, for he is something definite and therefore differentiated from the pleroma. God is a quality of the pleroma, and everything I have said about creation also applies to him. But he is distinct from creation in that he is much more indefinite and indeterminable. He is less differentiated than creation, since the ground of his essence is effective fullness. Only insofar as he is definite and differentiated is he creation, and as such, he is the manifestation of the effective fullness of the pleroma. Everything that we do not differentiate falls into the pleroma and is canceled out by its opposite. If, therefore, we do not differentiate God, effective fullness is canceled out for us. Moreover, God is the pleroma itself, just as each smallest point in the created and uncreated is the pleroma itself. Effective emptiness is the essence of the devil. God and devil are the first manifestations of nothingness, which we call the pleroma. It makes no difference whether the pleroma exists or not, since it cancels itself out completely. Not so creation. Insofar as God and the devil are created beings, they do not cancel each other out, but stand one against the other as effective opposites. We need no proof of their existence. It is enough that we have to keep speaking about them. Even if both were not, creation would forever distinguish them anew out of the pleroma on account of their distinct essences. Everything that differentiation takes out of the pleroma is a pair of opposites. Therefore, the devil always belongs to God. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to mute for a moment. Sorry, spring is coming to where I live in Annapolis, Maryland, so I am suffering the consequences. This inseparability is most intimate and, as you know from experience, is indissoluble in your life as the pleroma itself, since both stand very close to the pleroma in which all opposites are canceled out and united. Fullness and emptiness, generation and destruction are what distinguish God and the devil. Effectiveness is common to both. Effectiveness joins them. Effectiveness, therefore, stands above both and is a God above God, since it unites fullness and emptiness through its effectuality. This is a God you knew nothing about, because mankind forgot him. We call him by this name, Abraxas. He is even more indefinite than God and the devil. To distinguish him from God, we call God Helios, or sun. Abraxas is effect. Nothing stands opposed to him but the ineffective. Hence his effective nature unfolds itself freely. The ineffective neither exists nor resists. Abraxas stands above the sun and above the devil. He is improbable probability, that which takes unreal effect. If the pleroma had an essence, Abraxas would be its manifestation. He is the effectual itself, not any particular effect, but effect in general. He takes unreal effect because he has no definite effect. He is also creation, since he is distinct from the pleroma. The sun has a definite effect, and so does the devil. Therefore, they appear to us more effective than the indefinite Abraxas. He is force, duration, change. The dead now raised a great tumult, for they were Christians. But then Philemon had ended his speech, one after another. The dead also stepped back into the darkness once more, and the noise of their outrage gradually died away in the distance. When all the clamor had passed, I turned to Philemon and explained, "Pity us, wisest one. You take from men the gods to whom they could pray. You take alms from the beggar, bread from the hungry, fire from the freezing." Philemon answered and said, "My son, these dead have had to reject the belief of the Christians, and therefore they can pray to no God. So should I teach them a God in whom they can believe and to whom they can pray? That is precisely what they have rejected. Why did they reject it? They had to reject it because they could not do otherwise. And why did they have no other choice? Because the world, without these men knowing it, entered into that month of the great year where one should believe only what one knows. That is difficult enough, but it is also a remedy for the long sickness that arose from the fact that one believed what one did not know. I teach them the God whom both I and they know of, without being aware of him, a God in whom one does not believe and to whom one does not pray, but but of whom one knows. I teach this God to the dead, since they desired entry and teaching, but I do not teach him to living men, since they did not desire my teaching. Why, indeed, should I teach them? Therefore, I take away from them no kindly hearer of prayers from their Father in heaven. What concern is my foolishness to the living? The dead need salvation, since they are a great waiting flock hovering over their graves and long for the knowledge that belief and the rejection of belief has breathed their last. But whoever has fallen ill and is near death wants knowledge, and he sacrifices pardon. It appears, I replied, as if you teach a terrible and dreadful to God beyond measure, to whom good and evil, human suffering and joy are nothing. My son, said Philemon, did you not see that these dead had a God of love and rejected him? Should I teach them a loving God? They had to reject him after already having long since rejected the evil God, whom they call the devil. Therefore, they must know a God to whom everything created is nothing, because he himself is the creator, and everything created and the destruction of everything created. Have they not rejected a God who is a father? Have they not rejected a God who is a father, a lover, good and beautiful, one whom they thought to have particular qualities and particular being? Therefore, I must teach a God to whom nothing can be attributed, who has all qualities and therefore none, because only I and they can know such a God. But how, Father, can men unite in such a God? Does the knowledge of such a God not amount to destroying human bonds and every society based on the good and the beautiful? Philemon answered, these dead rejected the God of love, of the good and the beautiful. They had to reject him, and so they rejected unity and community and love in the good and the beautiful. And thus they killed one another and dissolved the community of men. Should I teach them the God who united them in love and whom they have rejected? I would therefore I teach them the God who dissolves unity, who blasts everything human, who powerfully creates and mightily destroys. Those whom love does not unite, fear compels. And as Philemon spoke these words, he bent down swiftly to the ground and touched it with his hand and disappeared. Okay, that's the second sermon to the dead. Any comments, Amela? Okay, the issue here is that Jung is realizing that God is beyond good and evil. Okay, God is not a good God up there, and God is not a bad devil down below. God is beyond that duality. And so God has a name, Braxis, um, but um, and exists, but he's everywhere. Richard says, I had a vision of Abraxas one day at Mass. His Mr. Burns, like the Simpsons face, popped out of the highest arch of the church, and I almost laughed out loud. I think God has a remarkable sense of humor. I concur. I concur, Richard. Um, and, the way I say it, um, in very simplified terms, is Nietzsche declared that God is dead. Jung came back in the next century, in the next generation, and found God where God lives and how God goes about doing the work of the Godhead. Um, and that's what we study when we study Jung vis-a-vis religion, where we study how God goes about doing the work of the Godhead. Um, okay, Melanie, thoughts there? Okay. I'm going to read some footnotes here now. Um, footnote 93, when he first introduces the name Abraxas. In 1932, Jung commented on Abraxas, the Gnostic symbol Abraxas, a made-up name meaning 365. The Gnostics used it as the name of their supreme deity. He was a time god. The philosophy of Bergson uh, is an expression of the same idea. Jung described him in a way that echoes his descriptions here, just as this archetypal world of the collective unconscious is exceedingly paradoxical. Always yes and no. That figure of Abraxas means the beginning and the end. It is life and death. Therefore, it is represented by a monstrous figure. It is a monster because it is the death of vegetation in the course of 1 year, the spring and the autumn, the summer and the winter, the yea and the nay of nature. So Abraxas is really identified with the demiurges, the world creator, and as such, he is surely identical with the Purusha or with Shiva in India. November 16th, in the Visions Seminar, Volume 2, page 806 to 807, Jung added that Abraxas is usually represented with the head of a fowl, the body of a man, and the tail of a serpent, but there is also the lion head symbol with a dragon's body, the head crowned with 12 rays, alluding to the number of months. June 7th, 1933, the Vision Seminar. According to St. Irenaeus, Basilides held the ruler of them is named Abrasax, and that is why this ruler has the number 365 within it. And then let's see. Okay, so there was a book called The Gnostic Scriptures by Leighton, page 425. Abraxas featured in Albrecht Dürer's work. Abraxas studies dieser religious Schuld des. See if I can see it without my spectacles. Studien zur religious Schicht des Patern Alternatums. Okay, I'm sorry for my pronunciation. Jung studied this work closely early in 1913, and his copy is annotated. Jung also had a copy of Charles King's The Gnostics and Their Remains, published in London, Bell and Daldy, 1864. And there are marginal annotations next to the passage discussing the etymology of Abraxas on page 37. And then there's a footnote on Helios. Helios is the Greek sun god. Jung discussed solar mythologies and transformations of symbols of the libido, 1912, and also in his unpublished concluding talk on Opus Sinus de Canistris at the Aranos Conference in Ascona in 1943. Okay, now I have to find where I am. Okay. All right. So I'm at the top of page 520. The nearest footnote, if you're looking at the electronic version, would be footnote 98. The date is February 1st, 1916. And this sentence, okay, so I'm about to read the third sermon, but let's look at any comments you may have. Art says, I think we put God in a box. Some people made God as a God of judgment. Yeah, I think that's quite right. And thank you, Art, for that comment. I think that is true. We envision God when we're little children, and so many of us never grow beyond that context of what God is. And Amela, did you have any comment? Okay. All right. I'm going to move on then.
Sorry, I was reading this part right here. Yeah, here you are. When we strive for good or the beautiful, we forget our essence, which is differentiation, and we fall subject to the spell of the qualities of the pleroma, which are the pairs of opposites. That's what comes to mind.
Yeah.
That's what stands out the most to me.
Right. Okay. What I neglected to do, which I maybe can do, is put the text on the screen. So I will attempt to do that now. I got discombobulated this morning because I somehow lost my own links to this session on Zoom, and therefore it took me a while to find that and get my weekly notice out. But just so everybody knows, we we are online every Sunday on the same links, and I'm just looking for where we are here in this. Far enough along, probably. Okay, because we're at footnote 98, so I gotta find footnote 98 because this lovely electronic version does not have page numbers.
Yeah, I get confused between the red book with a single page and then the red book with two pages on one page, so, or like 4 pages on one page. But
Found it.
there's a whole lot of super ego going on here.
What on Jung or on the chat?
Oh no, I mean here in within the context of um Jung and you know his vision of Philemon, and so he's sort of I'm not sure how to explain it yet, but uh
Do you mean it's an inflation? Do you think he's having this inflation that he can talk to Philemon and learn the details of God?
I, you know, he's going into something really heavy here
Yeah.
because it's one thing when we're dreaming and it's another thing when someone is dead. Because they can't come back. I mean, my grandma's very sick right now. She's my last living grandparent. And I asked one of her kids, I said, "Do you think that grandma's gonna die?" And he's like, "I have to go." So, and just hung up the phone. And I'm thinking to myself, because I don't really, I don't have an issue with death. As my mother says, you don't know when you're gonna be born and you don't know when you're gonna die. So just live your life the best way you can.
Right.
And so I'm thinking to myself, I was putting on my makeup and I'm thinking to myself, is there anything that I should ask my grandma before she goes to the other side? Because I'm never gonna be able to ask her again. So I don't know. It's he's somewhere between longing and acceptance, and also he a lot of people, I feel like, like a friend of mine, she's atheist, and so she's atheist, and we are completely different because I grew up in a very religious household, but but my mother was very eccentric and contemporary, and yeah, and so I asked her, do you think that maybe the problem is that it's not really God that you have a problem with? Do you think that maybe it's your uh your fear of letting go and for someone else to have the authority that you could never have? Does it scare you? Does it frighten you that you'll never have this authority where you're so perfect that you can create and destroy and be so flawless in the process of creating and destroying that there is no good or bad, because it's sort of like God is one and the other but none, if that
Right.
makes any sense.
It surely does, yeah. And okay, so all of this is a logical progression. Jung is at this point 2 years into World War One. Okay, February 1916. Let's say it's a year and a half into World War One, which began August 1st, 1914. And Jung has started to realize that the scientific method has done its worst on us. And let's see. Okay, so Jordan is trying to come on, but he has a reboot to do. Okay, so what Jung was realizing with the carnage in World War One, where 4 million men on each side were killed in this war. What a terrible carnage it must have been to be there, and um, and that's the deaths. That doesn't even count the wounds and the injuries that people had. And so uh, he's trying to understand why humanity as a group, why out of the collective unconscious, humanity as a group wants to fight and have this colossal clash between them. And I think he thinks it's because um, humanity, or at least European humanity, forgot they were Christian on both sides. They, because of the scientific method saying everything you got to have is provable, and so God is not provable in the physical sense, and therefore he must not exist. And if God doesn't exist, then it's every man for himself. You're not looking to a higher power for guidance. And the problem is that's not true. I mean, it's not true that God doesn't exist. God does exist, but God is something like what Jung is talking about here, and we're just in the process of rediscovering that now. We're in the process of rediscovering that there is a mystery, and we can call that mystery God or Abraxas or you name it. But it is beyond all of our ken. And um, so you better be respectful of it. I guess that's uh, what I would say. And also, what World War One says to me, and all the blood in the Red Book, and there obviously was lots of blood in the Red Book, is that blood is God's way of communicating with man, and so, or humanity. And so it's a blunt instrument, okay? And so therefore it took 4 million deaths on each side. And even after the war was over, in 1918, Jung realized from dreams he was assessing in his clinic that World War One wasn't over, that humanity was still struggling with these things, and he knew that there would be another war. And he recognized that he says in 1919 he realized that there would be another war because he was seeing it in the dreams and visions of his clients. Okay, any comment on that? No. Okay, so there's a couple of comments here. One combines Jung, Osborne, and Danny, and we have some interesting correlations. Um, and then State of Awakening says, I believe that Jung's entire psychology is, in a nutshell, is captured in this transaction as it pertains to the Red Book. That is, in the functional aspect as it applies to society. Um, well, yes, I agree with that, and that's why I've been willing to go through it multiple times now, and I'm currently reading the Red Book with two groups. One we're near the beginning of the Red Book, and this one we're near the end. This group we're near the end, and it's just incredibly important stuff that most human beings haven't thought about at all, I would say. Um, State of Awakening says, with the advent of social media sites and the platform they give to each individual's unconscious, the read on current events can be seen here as opposed to the dreams Jung saw. Yeah, I think so. In other words, um, before humanity was pretty insular, I would say. There wasn't a lot of getting around in Europe before the middle of the 19th century. Some people did it, of course, but if you were a farmer and you just wouldn't have had any experience uh, compared to us. I saw a statistic once that said the man of the 16th century was exposed to, in a lifetime, as much information as in one issue of the New York Times Sunday edition. Okay, so if you pick up the Sunday New York Times, that's all the information you get for a lifetime. Okay, in the 16th uh, in the 16th century. Um, and Yeah, and State of Awakening makes further comments. I just have to move it up so I can see it. Um, the complexity of interaction here also plays a large role in how quickly intuitive events can be realized once applied to an accepted unconscious perspective. Um, so yes, things are happening at breakneck speed, and um, as compared to humanity in earlier generations. And I don't know if we're up to it as a species. We try to be, and we try to educate folks, but many of them resist the education. And if they resist the education, then what can we do? And Lawrence Jaffe's quote about what Jung was about is really apt. I'll say it again. The purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious. So, in other words, if you as you await the death of your grandmother, Mela, or Debbie and I await the death of my mother-in-law, who's now 93 and living with us. Um, you do have to ask yourself, is there anything that I want to ask her about while she's here? But the reality is that based on Jung's perspective, you can ask her after she's dead too, because her whole being is now contained in your psyche. And so I've been doing this a little bit. It's hard to do because as I've said many times, I was disrespectful of both of my grandfathers. And yet if I put myself if I go back and look and see what they saw and did in their time, I have to rehabilitate them in my own psyche. And so in their lifetime, I was very resistant to them. I was just constantly trying to protect myself from my grandfathers because I didn't agree with their way of being. One grandfather was um, a bigot, the most bigoted man I ever knew, and that's still true. And my other grandfather was an alcoholic and died at age 68. Uh, and he was, if you want to know what he was like, all you have to do is read um, Eugenia O'Neill's play, The Death of a Salesman, because that is what he was like. And he was a traveling salesman like Willie Loman in the play. And it's a very sad thing. But that's where I was when they were alive. And keeping in mind that my paternal grandfather died on my wedding day. Okay. He literally died on my first wedding day. And and so I have to go back now and try to reevaluate his life. And, maybe most of us can't go back past our grandparents. Uh, we can. I once interviewed my paternal grandmother, and she was talking about people who were born in 1840. Okay, 1840, she knew. And so, but getting back earlier than that, it's pretty hard, except if you study history and try to imagine what your ancestors were like. I mean, before that time, my ancestors were um, bakers and running a laundry and all kinds of stuff. They were entrepreneurs. This is my paternal grandfather family. And of course it gets attenuated quite a bit because I have four grandparents and they all came from different environments. And so going back even farther to great grandparents, you just lose the thread very quickly. But you can, if you meditate on it, you can see what they were facing in their lifetime. And you can answer some questions. And so I have done this with my paternal grandfathers, um, and my grandmothers also, who I knew a little bit, but one of them died when I was 6 years old, when she was 63 of stomach cancer. And so I didn't know her very well. Uh, but she was a typical woman of her time. And my paternal grandmother was just appalled at things that were happening in terms of um, ethics and that sort of thing. Uh, and, she thought we should be rigid and follow rigid paths, but we didn't. And she saw that. She saw my father and me, let's put it that way. My father's mother saw the same things of me she had seen in um, in my father when he was growing up. Uh, so so Dionysus says triple W, a bajillion libraries of Alexandria. Well, yes, we all have a library of Alexandria within us. As I've taken on teaching this year, um, I've come to know that we can't pour information into these kids. They have to be opened up so that they see what we can see. And and so a child, for example, would know nothing of God, let's say, until you teach them. And so then they know something, and you know what they know because you taught them. But actually, what you've taught is something that's already in their psyches. Okay, they can relate to it very easily. Um, and and Richard says it's eerie that we've all had semi-religious experiences and similar enough to be drawn to Jung all at this time. Luke M. Oman of World War, that's obviously coming our way. Um, well, World War may come to us or not. Who knows? Um, we have to look at, maybe in 5 years' time, we'll be able to look back on the Ukrainian war and the Israeli-Palestinian war and um, have some sense of which way they were pointing um, for the future. Um, it seems to me, having watched the movie Mr. Jones, which was published in 2019, and I urge you to watch because it really will show you why the Ukrainians are fighting so hard. Um, if if Russia manages to get the Ukrainians to stop fighting for their homeland for a period of time, that war will not be over. There's no way it will be over. There might be an armistice. And, the same with the Palestinians. If all that happens out of this war is return to status quo ante, that means the status quo before the war, then the war won't be over for sure. And so we have to find solutions that work over the long term. And, the solution for Palestine has always been a two-state solution. I mean, or always since, early in the time that Israel became a country. Um, so anyway, any comments, Mela? Okay. Um, yeah. And Richard says the library is the internet now. Absolutely. The idea the idea that you can censor anything is just ludicrous today. I mean, the people that think that they're doing that in schools in Florida are just laughable because most of them will give their kids a cell phone about the time they're in seventh or eighth grade. And once they have the cell phone, you have no idea what they're reading, seeing, and listening to because the kids all have their own ways of getting around the parental blocks and they start talking to one another immediately. And so you better be prepared to be honest and straightforward about the way things work, sexuality, and all such issues, because they are going to work in your kids' lives too, and and you can't stop that. You can't stop that information from getting into their heads because it will. If they want to know it, if they hear something and they want to know what it is, they'll ask their friends. They'll look it up themselves. I joke that these days we ought to just give up public education at, at the eighth grade and give children their own cell phone and say good luck to you. Have a nice life, because they're going to learn whatever they want to learn. And and so the education will be okay, in my opinion. Okay, I can't even begin to tell you how many new things I've learned that are basically entire professions since I was an adult in the last 30 years or 40 years, counting all the time with uh, personal computers, which basically started in the early 80s. And so, okay. So good morning, everyone. We're going to move on to the third sermon for the dead. And if you are, I'm going to put the text back up on the screen so you can follow it. And hopefully it will be readable. I know when it's first published, it might be hard to read. So let me put it up and see if you think you can follow it. And so here it is. We're right at footnote 97 here, the following night. And can some of the YouTube group say whether you can read this or not? I'd appreciate it. I'm going to stop it in a moment. Okay. So can people who are watching on YouTube read this? And Mela, can you read this? Fine.
Oh, sure. Are we at
I'm
where
not
number
asking.
8 is?
I'm not asking you to read. I'm asking
Oh,
you whether you can
if I'm able to read it.
able to
Yes.
read it. Um, yeah.
Yes, I can. Mhm.
Okay. All right. So the following night, I get thumbs up from a couple folks, so I guess they're able to read it. So the following night, the dead, and the following night is February the 1st, 1916. So we're talking about a time that was about 108 years ago. Um, the following night, the dead approached like fog from a swamp and exclaimed, "Tell us more about the highest God." And Philemon stepped forward and began to speak. And this is the third sermon to the dead. Now, keep in mind for those who've just joined that this is all happening in Jung's imagination. Philemon, the highest God, all these things are in Jung's imagination. And so he's recounting this some years later, 30, 40 years later. Um, so and this is the third sermon of the dead. Abraxas is the God who is difficult to grasp. His power is greatest because man does not see it. From the sun, he draws the summum bonum, the perfect good. From the devil, the infimum malum, the perfect bad. But from Abraxas, life, altogether indefinite, the mother of good and evil. Now, I'll read a couple of these footnotes. Um, Footnote number 99, Aristotle defined happiness as the supreme good, summum bonum. Is his in his Summum Theologia, Thomas Aquinas identified this with God. Jung saw the doctrine of summum bonum as being the source of the concept of provatio boni, which in his view had led to the denial of the reality of evil. See Ion, paragraphs 80 and 94. Hence, it is counterbalanced here with the infimum malum. Now, the provatio boni is something that the church cooked up, which suggests that God is all good. And Jung's comment and teaching to us is that God is not all good, and he's also infinitely bad. Okay, footnote 100. In Black Book 6, Appendix C, Jung notes that Abraxas is the god of the frogs, and that the god of the frogs, or toads, the brainless one, is the union of the Christian God with Satan. In his later writings, Jung argued that the Christian God image was one-sided in that it left out the factor of evil. Through studying the historical transformations of God images, he attempted to correct this, especially in Ion and Answer to Job. In his note on how Answer to Job came to be written, he wrote that in Ion he had criticized the idea of privatio boni as not agreeing with the psychological findings. Psychological experience shows us that whatever we call good is balanced in an equally substantial bad or evil. If evil is non-existent, then whatever there is must needs the good. Dogmatically, neither good nor evil can be derived from man, since the evil one existed before man as one of the sons of God. The idea of the privatio boni began to play a role in the church only after Mani. Before this heresy, Clement of Rome taught that God rules the world with a right and a left hand, the right being Christ, the left being Satan. Clement's view is clearly monotheistic, as it unites the opposites in one God. Later Christianity, however, is dualistic inasmuch as it splits off one half of the opposites, personified in Satan. If Christianity claims to be a monotheism, it becomes unavoidable to assume the opposites as being contained in God. And that was from Collected Works 11, paragraphs 357 and 358. And that volume is called Psychology and Religion. It's a very good volume to own and read yourself. Okay, now, where am I? Okay. Life seems to be smaller and weaker than the summum bonum. Therefore, it is also hard to conceive that Abraxas's power transcends even the sun's, which is the radiant source of our all vital force. Abraxas is the sun at the same time, the eternally sucking gorge of emptiness, of the diminisher and the dismemberer of the devil. The power of Abraxas is twofold, but you do not see it because in your eyes, the warring opposites of this power are canceled out. What the sun god speaks is life. What the devil speaks is death. But Abraxas speaks that hallowed and accursed word that is at once life and death. Abraxas produces truth and lying, good and evil, light and darkness, in the same word and in the same act. Therefore, Abraxas is terrible. He is as splendid as the lion in the instinct he strikes down his victim. He is as beautiful as a spring day. He is the great and the small Pan alike. He is Priapus. He is the monster of the underworld, a thousand-armed polyp, a coiled knot of winged serpent's frenzy. He is the hermaphroditic of the earliest beginning. He is the lord of toads and frogs, which live in the water and go up on the land, whose chorus ascends at night, noon, and at midnight. He is the fullness that seeks union and emptiness. He is holy begetting. He is love and its murder. He is the saint and his betrayer. He is the brightest light of day and the darkest night of madness. To look upon him as blindness, to recognize him as sickness, to worship him as death, to fear him as wisdom, not to resist him as redemption. God dwells behind the sun, the devil behind the night. What God brings forth out of the light, the devil sucks into the night. But Braxis is the world, its becoming and its passing, open upon every gift. Upon every gift that comes from the sun god, the devil lays his curse. Everything that you request from the sun god produces a deed from the devil. Everything that you create from the sun with the sun god gives effective power to the devil. That is terrible, Abraxas. He is the mightiest created being, and in him creation is afraid of itself. He is the manifest opposition of creation to the pleroma and its nothingness. He is the son's horror of the mother. He is the mother's love for the son. He is the delight of the earth and the cruelty of the heavens. At his sight, man's face congeals. Before him, there is no question and no reply. He is the life of creation. He is the effect of differentiation. He is the love of man. He is the speech of man. He is the appearance and the shadow of man. He is deceptive reality. Now the dead howled and raged, for they were incomplete. But when their noisy cries faded away, I said to Philemon, "How, O my father, should I understand this God?" Philemon answered and said, "My son, why do you want to understand him? This God is to be known, but not understood. If you understand him, then you can say that he is this or that, and this and not that. Thus you hold him in the hollow of your hand, and therefore your hand must throw him away. The gods whom I know The God whom I know is this and that, and just as much this other and that other. Therefore, no one can understand this God, but it is impossible to know him, and therefore I speak and teach him." But I retorted, "Does this God not bring despairing confusion into the minds of men?" To this, Philemon said, "These dead rejected the order of unity and community, since they rejected the belief in the Father in heaven, who ruled with just measure. They had to reject him. Therefore, I teach them the chaos that is without measure and utterly boundless, to which justice and injustice, leniency and severity, patience and anger, love and hate are nothing. For how can I teach anything other than that the God whom I know and whom they know, without being conscious of him?" I replied, Why, O solemn one, do you call the why, O solemn one, do you call the eternally incomprehensible the cruel contradictoriousness of the nature of God? Philemon said, "How should I name it otherwise? If the overpowering essence of events in the universe and in the hearts of men were law, I would call it law. But it is also no law, but chance, irregularity, skin, error, stupidity, carelessness, folly, illegality. Therefore, I cannot call it law. You know that this must be so, and at the same time, you know that it did not have to be so, and that at some other time it will not be so. It is overpowering and occurs as if from works, and this void is a superior strength, harder than a mountain of iron. Therefore, you know that the eternal law is also no law. So I cannot call it law. But how else should it be? But how else should it be named? I know that human language has forever named the maternal womb of the incomprehensible God. Truly, this God is and is not, since from being and non-being, everything emerged that was, is, and will be. But Philemon said, when Philemon had spoken the last word, he touched the earth with his hand and dissolved. Okay, sorry. As I read these things, I find them very hypnotizing. And so if you see me struggling, that's why. Um, okay. And so we are up to subparagraph 9 here, which is the beginning of the fourth sermon to the dead. Let me look and see, are there any comments that you have, Amela?
Um, I really don't know. There's so much going on in my mind as you're reading because I'm thinking about um I'm sort of like like a clay vase, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm filling my mind very selectively with the New Testament, the Old Testament, and what Hypatia got in trouble for.
Mm-hmm.
So so I'm sort of in this scope of several scopes or uh
Several
realms.
dimensions. Yeah,
So, yeah.
multiple dimensions, I would say.
Yes, and I'm sort of trying to find common ground for each way of thinking, each perspective. And quite frankly, I don't want to get in trouble and I don't want to start debates. So I don't really have
Mm.
anything to say. But I will say that Braxis was also like some kind of emulant or like an ancient charm or something like that. So I also want to keep that in mind, that before Christ and after Christ, there was I guess there's this like politicalization of the teachings of Christ. So I just wanted to at least make that known, that I do acknowledge that there's a heavily politicalization of the teachings of Christ.
We're definitely seeing that in our country these days. That is a fact. Um, Cherie says spinning gold from the word of praise does not require a maiden's hand or the cacophonous, cacophonous stare of a blind frog, but it would be a nice gesture. And Richard says, God is all love. He comes as a destroyer to those who destroy. He doesn't expect a lot from us, but to respect him and love him as best we can. Um, well, we're messing around with the idea of karma here, I think. And so if you believe that God is all love and you actually live that, chances are you're going to have good results. If you turn your back on it, chances are you're going to have pretty miserable results. And and that's regardless of living or dead. So that brings up my favorite joke, which is when you're dead, you don't know you're dead. It's only difficult for your family. Um, when you're stupid, it works the same way. So, um, so my grandfathers don't know that they're dead. And I'm currently and have for a long while been struggling with their lives and what they faced in their lifetimes. And it really doesn't change anything for my grandfathers, but nonetheless, I have their spirit to inform me, uh, something like that. And so in your case, you have your grandmother's spirit, and when she does cross over to the other side, you'll still have that. It won't be any less when she does cross over. And um, and I think that that's the part of the good news, maybe part of the good news of Jesus Christ, which, which is the way I interpret the story of Lazarus, because, uh, did Jesus physically wake up Lazarus so he was walking and living again? Probably not. But what he did do was to make him living again in the heart of the two Marthas, who Jesus made it so that they could understand that, they can always love Christ, whether he's physically alive or not. Um, or I'm sorry, can always love their brother Lazarus, whether he's physically alive or not. This is Mary Magdalene's brother, apparently, Lazarus. Um, and I certainly find this is true in my own life. My parents, my brother, who have gone over to the other side, nothing has changed except that I can't have further experience with them. That's it. And I can have further experience with them in my psyche. I may not be able to have physical experience, um, but I can certainly have experience where talk to them and communicate with them. And I actually did have this experience with my brother. And it wasn't a physical experience. It happened in my psyche. I understand that. But shortly after he died, he came to me um, in a dream or a vision. I don't even know if I was awake or asleep, but told me that he was going to be okay. Right? He was okay. And, you know, I believe he was. He had come to grips with what happened to him, which was that he had his liver eaten out by an amoebic creature, Gerardia, that lives in the Colorado River, and he knew that it was going to kill him ultimately, and he lived with it for 15 years. He had, in the last 10 weeks of his life, he had 15 major surgeries, including 3 liver transplants, and then he died because he couldn't go, his body just couldn't go on. But my love of my brother, there are ways that I look at our lives and which they wish they had gone differently. But on the other hand, he was my best friend for many years. He and I had so many adventures together. Um, and because we lived um, in a context where we were always moving schools, we had to be self-contained, just the two of us. Um, and and so he and I, had so many adventures together. Um, one that always comes to mind is when we we beat a Navy captain uh, in a sailboat race where our boat was literally falling apart around our ears, but we came up with ways to keep it going. And, guide came along with a puff of wind in the right direction at the right moment, and we won the race. And as soon as the race was over, I had to take the sails down and indicate that I was in distress in the sailboat. But my brother and I got through that together. Um, and I couldn't have done it alone, of course. And we figured out ways to do things. And so, um, he definitely still lives in my psyche um, because of that. He's quite alive. And as I look back now on my entire life, I had occasion to look at a bunch of old pictures. Um, I got scared to death this week because one of my cousins, second cousin, the daughter of one of my cousins, um, wrote to me and said she wanted a tribute video about her father. She didn't explain it. I just want a tribute video. Well, holy smokes, when you get something like that, you think, wow, did my cousin die? I can't imagine that he died, but um, maybe that's why he needed a tribute. Well, it turned out he was turning 65 on St. Patrick's Day. He's turning 65. But I went through a couple of days there where I got this email saying, would you make a tribute video? Where I thought he had died and this was for a funeral ceremony. Really weird. So anyway, I think I'll stop at this point today. I've had to do a lot of soliloquy here for the most part, and when what happens to me when I read complex passages like this is I literally hypnotize myself, and if you look in the right places, you can find uh, videos of me reading something and then literally falling asleep while I'm reading. And it's because these ideas are so complex, they put so many thoughts in your mind that it's literally a hypnotic induction. And uh, do you have experience with hypnotic inductions, Mela?
Yes, I was looking at my cat Aphrodite, and I said to myself, "Oh my God, she's so peacefully asleep. I want to sleep too." But I know that my thoughts are so supersonic right now that I will
Mhm.
not be able to sleep.
Mhm. Yeah,
And this conversation also reminds me of our previous conversation, when we spoke about things that are intangible, so the spiritual and the reality,
yeah,
uh, which I think is probably the meat of the sandwich as to why Jung was so attracted to Sigmund Freud. And It's a whole chunk of a sandwich.
yeah. It was a chunk of his early sandwich, but then he was realizing that there's more to it than that. You can't just reduce
Too.
everything to the physical world, okay?
Yeah.
Because everything we've been talking about including the reading of sermons 2 and 3 here, are quite real. They exist in the universe, and just because they're not tangible doesn't mean they don't exist. They do exist, and just because my brother is no longer physically with us, he was alive in this session this afternoon or this morning, because I was talking about him and things that we did together in life, and those things are still quite alive in me, surely. I do want to bring everybody's attention to something that's quite beautiful that I found in the last week, and that is a song called One Voice. And if you put into YouTube the name One Voice and then Navy Band, you can hear an ethereal rendition of this song. It's just so beautiful and so calming, if you're just listening to it. So I urge you to take a look at that. And then I'll tell you the secret that there's also a version of it that was done by the Air Force Band. And my wife and my mother-in-law both say that the Air Force's was better. They're different, okay? The Navy one has only 3 singers in it, and their voices are just splendid, especially the soprano. And the Air Force Band has the entire Air Force orchestra and chorus and all the audience that they had on a given day when they sang this and video recorded it. So the Air Force Band version is a built out version of the same thing, but the essence of it, in my opinion, is covered by the Navy Band version. I urge you to watch that first. It only takes 3.5 minutes on the Navy version. The Air Force version takes about 6 minutes, I think. But it's an amazing song. I wish we could get every choir in the United States, every choir in the world to sing it.
What is it?
It's called One Voice. One Voice. And I think I can recite the first verse, which is, "This is the sound of one voice, one spirit, one voice. Um, the sound of one who has made a choice. This is the sound of one voice." Okay, so that's sung only by the soprano, and then she's joined by another singer who sings the second verse. This is the sound of voices too. Singing. Anyway, it's about 2 voices and then 3 voices, and then it becomes a voice of a people, and it just is. To me, it's spectacular, and I urge you to take a look at it. I'm looking at it right now on my screen, and it has 350,000 views. It's been on YouTube for 9 years, but I never knew about it until this week. And gee, it's special. So I hope
I've just found it. Okay, there you go. After all the Barry and girl bands and all that, it's under the United States Navy Band account, and it's One Voice.
right,
950K views. It's 9 years
right.
ago. It was published 9 years
And so
ago.
you see the three women, one's a brunette, one's a sort of a redhead or a strawberry blonde, and one's a blonde, and
Yes,
they sing it. It's just uh, great.
beautiful.
And Cherie says the poem by Edward Arnold, the song Celestial, Dave Brubeck, jazz musician, got his start under General Patton World War II. What an example Dave Brubeck was in his life. Okay. So sometimes a song can just grab you. Okay. And this is not rap, this is not rock, this is just a beautiful song. And it's also not religion. Okay. Uh, it's something special for all of us. Um,
Like the
so
Olympics.
something like the Olympics, yeah. Anyway, uh, and so I'm glad I had a chance to let you know about it. And let's see, do I still have? Uh, okay, I think we're all right. All right, so I'm going to call a halt here, and we'll start with sermon number 4 next week. And so thank you for being here. I'll try to be better at getting the notice out early next week. I really got myself in a jam because I take the links from a file that I keep, and I changed that file and I lost the connection for Sunday. So I had to go rebuild it, but I finally got it. So anyway, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Amela, for